a quorum. Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Citizens Advisory Committee for Lake Champlain. It's July 8th at 5:03 p.m. Thanks, everybody, for joining. It looks like we have some guests online. Is anybody in the room this was our first attempt at a hybrid meeting.
We did not end up doing a hybrid, so
Oh, we didn't. Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Everyone's in their own space today.
Okay, all right. There's nobody all together in a room somewhere. Good. Okay. Well, I mean, not whatever. So do we want to do introductions, or does anybody have any public comment for the Citizens Advisory Committee? Does anybody want to introduce themselves? Maybe, Katie, should we just go around and do a quick round of introductions?
Sure.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm Denise Smith. I'm the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee. I'll just call on people as I see you. Senator Brock.
Hi, I'm Randy Brock. I'm one of the legislative representatives, and I represent the Senate, and I'm the Senate Minority Leader.
Representative Odie.
Hi, I'm Carol Odie. I represent the far new north end of Burlington, and I'm on this committee now. This is my 8th year.
Really? I see a Ricky Lauren.
Hi, I'm Ricky Lauren. I'm with the New York CAC, and I just like to get ideas if I can.
Welcome, Ricky. It's nice to have you. I should attend one of your meetings. Wayne Elliott.
Yes, Wayne Elliott. I'm a consulting engineer, and I represent South Burlington and Colchester.
Excellent. Thanks, Wayne. And I see Eric Clifford, my old friend. How are you?
Hi there. Eric Clifford, dairy farmer down in Starksboro, longtime CAC member, and sort of represent the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Andrew?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Andrew Milliken. I'm a biologist. I live in Charlotte, and I'm a member in waiting, or whatever the term is.
A member. It's okay. Thanks for being here. And then let's see. Breck?
Good evening, folks. Breck Bowden, former faculty member from the University of Vermont, and former member and chair of the Technical Advisory Committee for the Basin Program, and now a member of the CAC, Vermont CAC.
Thank you. Michael Bard?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a Waterbury selectman. I'm a former program director for USDA Rural Development, and I'm on the board of several different sportsmen's organizations, including treasurer of the Vermont Traditions Coalition, which is a coalition of a bunch of different outdoor groups. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Let's see. Who am I missing is there anybody else from the public? And then we have the two Basin program staff, Katie and May Kate. Do you guys want to just introduce yourself?
Hi, Katie Dar, Citizens Advisory Committee Coordinator and Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Network Coordinator.
Thanks, Katie. And May Kate Campbell, Associate Scientist with the Basin Program.
Great.
Did we get Bob? I was tending to an email during some of the introductions.
Oh, I forgot Bob. His screen is black. I can't see him.
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. No, that's my fault.
No. I'm a very quiet member that doesn't normally speak or anything, so it's fine. Bob Fisher. I am a biologist. I'm the water quality superintendent for South Burlington. I am live in the town of Barry, and I am the current past president of New England Water Environment Association. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Did I get everybody? Is there anybody else in chat that I'm missing? All right. Well, our next thing is public comment. Does anybody have any comments that they would like to bring before the CAC? Anything that's not on the agenda? All right. It says chair's update. And I trying to remember what I had intended by that, Katie. 'Cause I think we
Yeah,
talked-
I don't know if you'll have an update because there wasn't an executive or
meeting.
steering committee meeting between our last meeting and this one, but I just wanted to hold space on the agenda because at the last meeting we said this was going to be an agenda item, so your update can be no update if that's what you have to
I appreciate
say.
that. Yeah, and I think May Kate is probably going to provide an update that we're looking forward to. So, so one of the things as the liaison and as the chair of this committee, I now sit on the executive and the steering committee for the Lake Champlain Basin program, and there's always some like nuggets of things that happen at those meetings that I'm hopeful to bring back to this meeting on a monthly basis. The steering committee meets quarterly. And the executive committee meets. They had one at the hotel in Burlington, but I can't remember how often they meet. Is that a monthly meeting or every other month?
Yeah, approximately monthly, although both committees take a summer hiatus.
That's why there hasn't been a meeting. Okay, great. Thank you. But going forward, if there is a meeting, I will plan on bringing updates from that meeting to this meeting. And then I need an action item. We have to review and vote on the June 13th meeting summary. So I just need a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved. This is Breck, with a comment that these are incredibly helpful notes.
Thank you, Katie.
Second, Wayne.
Wayne, thanks, Wayne. All those in favor? Maybe just raise your hand or.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay, those minutes from our retreat pass.
I'll just share, this was an edit that I made just a few minutes before this started. I got one of the act numbers wrong, so I updated. I had Act 176, it was Act 76, so I changed that and we'll have that in the approved version.
Oh man, we've got to redo the whole thing.
Just want to be honest that, it will look slightly different than what you just approved, but more accurate, so for the better.
Breck, you need to make another motion or are we gonna have to revote?
Motion to accept as amended.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Wayne, do you want to second that?
Yeah.
All right. Are we good? Any dissenters? All right. I think those passed. All right. So without further ado, what we're going to jump to next, which is part of a Basin program update, is the FY25 research priorities that May Kate's going to share with us.
Great, thanks, Denise. I'll just set the stage for this discussion. So one of the sets of priorities that's identified in our management plan for the Lake Champlain Basin Opportunities for Action is research to better understand and guide management of the Lake Champlain Basin. And there's a number of areas, of developed lands, agriculture, all sorts of areas that are relevant to our research focus. So every year, the Basin Program puts out a request for proposals for research projects that would advance management topics related to the health of the watershed. And as part of this, for a long time, the Technical Advisory Committee has identified priorities. So areas of research that they feel would be particularly timely or helpful, ongoing questions that we need more information on to better guide our management. And kind of in the last couple years, this process has expanded to become a bit more collaborative beyond just the Technical Advisory Committee. So over the summer between steering committee meetings in June and September, a call has been put out to steering committee members and other Basin Program Advisory Committee members to contribute to this development of research priorities for the upcoming request for proposals. So you all might recall that due to the CAC's involvement and interest in emerging contaminants, a couple years ago, one of the priorities was for research to better understand the state of emerging contaminants in the basin and work towards developing a framework for ongoing monitoring. So that's a project that is still in process and something that came out of the CAC's involvement with this process. So great collaboration and advancement of that to see. So the intention here is just to have an open-ended discussion about any kind of topics or areas that the CAC would be interested in seeing more research or the advancement of research on those topics. And then the next steps from that is Katie and I will compile the information from this discussion at today's meeting, and we will bring that back to the Technical Advisory Committee. They will kind of hear all of the priorities coming from steering committee members and other advisory committee members and work to put together kind of a ranked list or kind of just general tracks for research that is of interest to basin stakeholders. And then we'll forward that to the steering committee in September for their review and approval. And the finalized request for proposals will come out at the end of September. So projects that were funded through this process last year are kind of just getting off the ground for this field season after going through the contracting phase and developing quality assurance project plans for most projects that are collecting technical data. So I have a list of the research projects that were funded in the last 5 years and kind of the state of, where they are, if they're in progress or if they've already wrapped up. So I'm happy to provide more information about projects that were funded recently. I think Denise, at the very least, would have received a copy of that as a steering committee member. I'm not sure if that was able to be circulated more broadly to other folks, but it sounds like Katie provided me a little bit of background on discussions that this committee has had relevant to that recently. So I just wanted to touch on that. Because of the growth of the basin program's budget and kind of the reorganization of how we put out different categories of funding, there haven't been any research proposals in the last 2 years that were recommended by the Technical Advisory Committee that we weren't able to fund. So that's great. I know there was a question about, what was almost funded, but maybe didn't quite make it over the line. So that's not as relevant for the last couple years. And then it sounded like at your last meeting, Katie noted that there was maybe some interest in research on the intersection of infrastructure and nutrients, and a question about how various pollinator policies in the basin impact pollinator diversity in the watershed, and what are the impacts of those policies downstream to rivers and lakes. So maybe that's kind of a starting point for the conversation. But again, this is just intended to be an open-ended collaborative discussion, and we will forward all of these ideas to the Technical Advisory Committee. So, feel free to just bounce ideas around. It doesn't have to be a fully fleshed out research proposal. Any area that the committee would be interested in seeing more research in is welcome in the discussion. Any questions with that background I provided?
I think that's helpful, May Kate. Breck, I see you've come off mute.
I was just off.
Oh, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything specifically about infrastructure and nutrients coming off infrastructure. I feel like that was a conversation we had in June.
I can certainly remind folks about what I had said in June, and it's just been a curiosity, I think, that the per acre level of phosphorus delivery from the developed parts of Lake Champlain, which are largely Burlington, Chittenden County area, are higher actually than agriculture. Agriculture overall is a larger source just because, well, partly because it's a larger area that's influencing the lake, but the per acre delivery is higher in the urban area. The question about why that occurs. There is evidence from a number of other places that exfiltration from sewer systems, and we're largely sewered in this part of the lake, is a potential source of nutrients to groundwater. That's not something that's ever been looked at, to my knowledge, and I think it would be an interesting research question that could inform future investments and in infrastructure updates.
Thanks, Breck. I think that's certainly an interesting question.
Andrew?
Yeah, I just wanted to provide some additional context related to the discussion we had at our last meeting around neonicotinoids and the Lake Champlain Basin. I think that conversation came out of the discussion around H706, which was the ban in Vermont, and we noted that there is also a ban in New York and Quebec, and wondered if there might be an opportunity to look at the Lake Champlain Basin as a place where these bans are going into place, and whether there is any tracking or monitoring relative to those chemicals or any impacts from those chemicals in the basin. I think kind of just a brainstorming discussion at that point, but just something to think about whether there's an opportunity maybe with the three CICs talking to each other. I don't know. So that's where that came from, in case you're wondering, Kate.
Yeah, thanks for that additional context. That's helpful.
Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Kate.
Oh,
I
no.
was just gonna say, one of the things that came through the CAC last year was the public access. I know we've talked about this a couple of times, that there weren't any applicants through that channel, and whether that's something the CAC wants to suggest again.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I was just pulling that up to make sure that I got the language correct. But yeah, one of the areas that the CAC had identified as a priority that made it into the RFP was public access. So research to identify geographic areas, methods, and/or programs that would expand public access and remove barriers to enjoyment of Lake Champlain, its tributaries, and water recreation opportunities, specifically with a focus on underserved communities. We did not receive any proposals for that track, even though it was identified as a priority for research. So if that is something that the CAC is interested in pursuing, we'd be happy to bring that back to the steering committee along with the feedback that we weren't able to receive proposals through the traditional research RFP method. And I think the steering committee would perhaps consider putting that in a standalone separate request for proposals that might be a little bit easier to socialize with different networks. I'm not sure that the audience for the typical research RFP is the same as the types of folks that would pursue a more public access, although research oriented kind of topic. So that's something that we could discuss again if the CAC is still interested in more information on that topic.
Senator Brock. Thanks, Nikki.
Perhaps I just have a bad head cold and like President Biden aren't doing well tonight. But I heard what this said, and I quite frankly don't entirely understand it. Could someone explain what it is that we want to do here and who it is? What's the target audience? Who do we think can do it? And what's the deliverable? I didn't quite get that from what I heard.
Sure. So there's kinds of two related discussions happening. Right now, this is just an open-ended discussion about any questions for research related to the Lake Champlain Basin that the CAC might be interested in having more information on. So that would be used to inform priorities that are going to be included in the upcoming annual request for proposals for research projects. And then what we were just sharing is that last year there was a request for research around, public access or ways that we can improve public access to the lake that we did not receive any proposals for. So we were wondering if that's something that this group would be interested in seeing still. So the kind of overall research question is identified in the request for proposals, especially in those priorities. But the specific deliverables aren't necessarily enumerated at this time. We want to keep the the different priorities a little bit broad so that we can see what comes in with the different proposals, what different teams are kind of pitching as the deliverable that they think best fits that research question that's identified.
And to whom are the requests for proposals? To whom are these things directed?
The basin.
Yeah.
The question is in your opinion and our opinion, is the potential audience wide enough to encompass some of the things that are perhaps non-traditional that we may be looking for?
Yeah, so the typical audience for the request for proposals is researchers located in the Lake Champlain Basin. So this could be, folks in academic positions at universities, folks in, consulting, private practice sorts of firms, folks in non-governmental research-oriented organizations, and it is eligible for applicants in Vermont, New York, and Quebec. So traditionally, we've seen a lot of proposals coming in from, UVM, SUNY Plattsburgh. There's a couple teams in Quebec who have traditionally put in proposals as well, but it's not necessarily limited to those groups.
How many proposals overall do we get each year as a result of this?
Yeah, it's a two-phase process. So it starts out with a request for pre-proposals. We typically get somewhere between 15 to 25 pre-proposals, and then a subset of applicants are invited to advance to the full proposal stage. So it's for projects up to $300,000. And we typically have a couple $1 million available for this RFP. So that's consistent with kind of the funneling that we want to get in terms of the number of projects that we can fund.
Well, what I'm trying to understand also is, are we soliciting projects that we, for example, think will be useful, or are we simply opening the door to projects covering broad or general areas, and then we look for the proposers to tell us what they think should be done?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. We want to keep it's limited to the items that are listed in the management plan for the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And it has a requirement that the research needs to be able to inform management decisions. So it can't just be, purely research for research's sake. It needs to be something that can inform an action that we would implement in the watershed on the landscape to improve our management of the basin. So in general, the Technical Advisory Committee comes up with areas of priorities, so specific research questions that they would like to see more information on. But we don't want to limit it to just the priorities that one group has identified. So we also leave the door open to research covering any management topic in the Lake Champlain management plan that would advance management actions.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I am seeing a couple more hands up. So it looks like Wayne and then Sarah.
Yes, thank you, Mickey. Probably follows up on Senator Brock's. Do you guys have I know you're looking for feedback from this group of potential subjects. Do you guys have a short list or anything as of yet that you could share that would be ideas that some of the other groups and committees have to start with, maybe that would be helpful, I think, for us? Or
I can provide examples of research projects that were funded in previous years. We don't have a short list yet because we're kind of at the broad list stage of this development process. But once we've received input from the different committees, I would be happy to share the overall list that gets sent to the TAC, and they're the ones who develop the short list from that broader list of ideas that we've solicited from the different advisory committees and stakeholders.
Okay, thanks. My second question is the request for the public use, was that limited to certain geographic areas? Because I know because maybe, I know our more focus has been at the southern end of the lake, and maybe the geographic scope of that was just too big for anybody to really get a handle. I don't know if we were looking at necessarily increasing public access to the entire watershed, but maybe that would be helpful if it was more specific to certain geographical areas. Just a suggestion.
Yeah, that's a great thought. Thank you, Wayne. Great. Sarah, did you have something to add?
Kate, you touched on it, but I just wanted to emphasize that the change in the approach of having these research tracks was really to support research that does inform decision making and policy and knowledge gaps that can really facilitate that. And so this process is to support that, from sort of what decision making questions and policy questions do we still have that research would support.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Go ahead, Breck.
One thing that occurs to me is, as I think most people know, the Vermont Climate Council is currently revising the climate action plan for Vermont, and that is, of course, a Vermont-wide perspective, not something that is related to Lake Champlain exclusively. One big part of that is an initiative to try to quantify the social costs of greenhouse gas emissions in Vermont. And there's a very complex and interesting tool that has been adopted and modified by the EPA. It was developed by Resources for the Future group that takes an expansive look at what are all of the elements that might be contributing to the social costs of these carbon emissions. And they produced a report at the end of 2023, which lists all of these factors. I could show you a table of these if the group is interested in this. But what's amazing to me is how many things are not included in that at the moment, and that they realize are important. So those are things like in the area of water, the provision of safe drinking water and water storage and distribution. In the area of food production, animal and livestock health and productivity, and fisheries production. In forestry, timber production and so forth. So a bunch tourism, there's a bunch of categories under tourism. These are all things that affect Vermont broadly, but affect Lake Champlain in specifically. I wonder if there's an opportunity for research on the co-benefits of factors that could be affecting Lake Champlain, but would have a broader impact on reducing the social costs of greenhouse emissions, and would have therefore two benefits: one to the lake, and a second that could be more broadly to how we're approaching things in Vermont with respect to our climate action plan.
Yeah, thanks, Breck. That would certainly be timely.
Yeah, so briefly, co-benefits.
Yeah. Andrew, it looks like you're in support.
Yeah. I thinking about the climate action plan and the co-benefits for the things that are critical for the Lake Champlain Basin is that, what are some specific research priorities? I think really understanding the intersection of carbon mitigation and flood resilience and biodiversity, and if we can only do some things, can we find those places where all those things come together, and certainly the social cost is part of that. So I just echo and support what Breck said.
Great, thank you both.
I guess I don't want to hog time here, but I do have one other. There a couple of years ago, when actually Andrew and I were both on the Federal Partners Group, there was an initiative to do environmental mapping, and the origin of that was for oil spill response on Lake Champlain. But the idea was that environmental mapping of the coastal areas, you know, around Lake Champlain would have some other co-benefits with respect to how do we identify priority areas for preservation or conservation or whatever. Can either of you tell us a little bit about where that initiative is, and are there any research opportunities that could be associated with that?
Yeah, great question, Breck. So that was funded a little bit separately from this process, although that's certainly obviously related to research questions and needs. So I believe the environmental sensitivity index mapping project is still ongoing. I would need to double check with Lauren to get a status update on that. But since I'm guessing that it's probably got, you know, at max another year under that initiative, it sounds like we might be getting to a point where we could start to share some of the results of that more broadly and think about what questions are coming up now that we have that new resource almost available. So I can follow up and get an update from Lauren and get more information to this group.
Yeah, so to formulate perhaps a more succinct sentence for you, it would be, you know, are there some opportunities associated, some research opportunities that are associated with the ongoing effort to develop this environmental sensitivity index mapping?
Great, thank you, Breck.
Kate, when's the, I know this is kind of the broad brush right now, but like if we have, do you want like a written list of research recommendations from this committee, or like what's the process for getting the recommendations to you, is aside from this conversation?
Yeah, so a little bit up to the committee, but Katie and I can take the discussion that we had today and kind of distill it into a couple bullet points that are, these are the research priorities coming from the CAC for consideration. The ask to steering committee members was to submit research ideas by, I believe it's August 15th. So there's still a bit more time. And then the TAC will discuss those priorities at their September meeting, which is the first Wednesday in September. So a little bit of more time, and I'm happy to report back to this group on those next steps. But if there are any follow-up questions, like Breck's suggestion about the environmental sensitivity index mapping that I can look into, or if there's any other thoughts on priorities that come up over the next month, you can still send those in to Katie and she can help get them to myself and the rest of the technical team. And we can put those in for consideration as well. So happy to take that next step of distilling those research priorities and sending them around to the CAC for wordsmithing or any clarification or just confirmation that they accurately reflect the discussion that we had today. And then we can move those along in this process. Any last thoughts or?
Anyone else have anything, thoughts? And don't think this is the only, I think the point is August 15th. So we still have another meeting before. Do we have another meeting in August, Katie?
We usually don't meet in August.
Okay. I feel like we talked about maybe meeting in August for the action plan, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I think that depends on how we want to proceed with the
Yeah,
action
so
plan
that's our
drafting. That
next
might be,
conversation.
yeah, some subcommittees or yeah.
Okay, but regardless, if anybody has any thoughts on research priorities, don't hesitate to email me, Kate or Katie directly, so that they can be put in on the list for consideration. If it's not coming to you right now, but it's something that you think about after this meeting or over the next couple of weeks.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Enjoy your night.
I'll still be here. So if you think of anything else before the end of the meeting, you can share it as well.
You're staying with us. Yay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay. We're a little ahead of schedule, which isn't a bad thing, but our next topic is supposed to take an hour. And it is our action plan action plan drafting. I don't know. It just has my name on it, but it's not just me. So I just want to make that very clear. This is a group effort and we are all included. And I would love it if Katie could bring up the notes from our June meeting so that we can talk a little bit about what we discussed a month ago, kind of refresh everybody's minds a little bit in terms of I think what emerged as some pretty focused themes in my mind for the action plan. I can do it, Katie, if you want me to.
Yeah, I went through this afternoon and just tried to more cleanly pull out the main themes there.
Of course you did. I just adore you so much for doing that because I did not do that and wanted to.
That's all right.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody see that? I'm going to take silence as a yes.
I saw a nod. We're good.
Okay, so we got a nod. Okay, so based on the question I asked at our retreat in June, which was if you pick one, right, one priority, what would it be? And this is basically, I think you nailed the themes that sort of emerged from that conversation, Katie. And so I'm happy to maybe, I don't know if we want to read them all off. I feel like there's even some that could even be more condensed into one or two. But curious what people think about this list that you're looking at.
The first and the last priority seem to be almost one and the same.
Thank you.
Yeah, it kind of seems like the first is a subset of the last to some degree.
Right. Bob Fisher, you could just, right, you could add that to the sentence and drop that line. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also wonder the balancing act between housing and water quality impacts and nutrients from developed lands, intersection of infrastructure and nutrients. Or is infrastructure kind of what Breck was just talking about wastewater treatment plants and seepage? Or
yeah, I think my interpretation of that bullet point was that was what that was, and that's certainly affected by climate change, but it would happen in the absence of climate change. So I don't think it's directly related.
No, I wasn't saying under climate change, just the housing, water quality impacts, as well as develop those two. Sorry, does that make sense?
I'm sorry. Yeah. It could be a subset of that. Sure.
That could be a subset. Okay.
I agree with that.
And I'm just wondering whether, looking at floodplain restoration, that's a specific and I think critically important component of just, flood responsiveness or flood mitigation. So I think there's a broader topic of how we address future flooding, which is a climate change piece. But I would argue for keeping it separate because it's just such a huge issue for us. So flood mitigation, of which floodplain restoration is an important component, but not the only component.
And hi, this is Bob Fisher. Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. It's difficult here. I'm just going to play sort of devil's advocate here, so more or less. Climate change is going to be our very first thing that says on there. I'm not saying I'm opposed to that. I'm just saying is there other people on this committee that have some, I'm always looking for balance. Thank you.
Bob, we're not saying that's going to be the first thing, not necessarily like the first words on this, but there was conversation in June about aligning our priorities with the climate action plan, or at least informing each other and informing ourselves of that. I think that I I don't think anybody's arguing right now that climate change is going to be the first two words on the plan.
It was the fourth and fifth on last year's plan.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay,
The
all right.
confluence of climate change impacts. Yeah. So right below, sorry, we should have probably explained that. Right below is the narrative from the 2024 Lake Champlain Action Plan.
And I'll move up the priorities so we can see those in one place too. From last year. Breck, you have a hand?
Yeah, actually, was that Bob who just made that last comment? I just wanted to endorse that comment. I mean, climate change is just such a throwaway statement now, and it is a context that affects every one of those bullet points. It affects chloride, it affects cyanobacteria, it affects the balancing act between housing and flood mitigation and so forth. So I just wonder about whether you lead with it or not. I mean, climate change is just a given that we have to address, and maybe that sits up front someplace as an umbrella, and then these more specific things, these more specific bullet points are suggested responses to this overriding challenge that we're facing.
And yeah, hi, sorry, it's Bob really quickly. And I was trying to make more clear that water, all inclusiveness, that right off the bat, that, it's going to get some, you're introducing this to the legislature and the people, and you're going to, to modify, to try to soften the language somehow to make it all inclusive, Well,
I was going to ask that, are those two words together? And Senator Brock, maybe you could help, as polarizing from people's perspective, as I feel like they may have been a few short years ago, or are they more, I don't know, accepted or not accepted, but less polarizing? Senator Brock, I don't know if you're muted.
Sorry about that. The whole issue of climate change is polarizing among some people, but flood mitigation is not. And that is one of the major things that we are concentrated about. But one of the things that I was actually, I had my hand raised to talk about was whether or not there should be something in here in terms of goals regarding measurement and accountability. Because right now we say these are all great things to do, but we don't seem to try to establish any measures or accountability or reporting as to whether or not we've actually accomplished anything. And that to me is a major concern. I'd be interested in what others might think, whether I'm on the wrong track here.
I mean, I'm happy to comment on that. It seems to me that a major responsibility of the Agency of Natural Resources and Ag and Food are to do exactly that, and that there are some very sophisticated systems that have been developed over a period of the last 10 years or so, especially in relationship to the TMDL for Lake Champlain, with EPA in the back or side by side with the state of Vermont, holding our feet to the fire with respect to meeting those TMDL objectives. That is exactly what we have to do, is to quantify what some of those impacts are. Now, that's specifically about phosphorus, but it is tied to a bunch of other things like flood mitigation and runoff from roads, which impacts chloride and so forth. So I agree with you, Senator, that maybe there's additional quantitative accountability that needs to be added to some of these other initiatives, but I don't think it's absent, I guess I'll say.
I just wonder, as we go to the legislature and we say, well, we need some money to help the lake out, to deal with some of the issues that we have, but without going in a way that is direct and understandable. You know, sending the legislature pages of numbers is not an effective way to communicate with them. Are we making progress? Is the lake getting better? And we can look at some of the things that we're doing about mitigation of the problems, and Lake Carmine stands out, leaps out off the page at us, in which things are getting worse rather than better. And communicating that and what we need to do to turn it around, I think it ought to be a major priority of ours. And in some cases, that means that we have to say things in a much more direct and understandable way, so that we have a message that we want to communicate and that we can concentrate that message as to these are the things that we think we should do now. These are what they will cost. And again, obviously trying to keep it affordable in terms of what we can afford. But these are the necessary steps we may need to take in order to prevent the lake from getting much, much, much worse.
I don't know whose hand was up first, Michael or Andrew's.
Well, I'll jump in. I agree 100% with what Senator Brock has said. Not that I don't believe, I do believe in climate change, but when you talk about climate change, it's like saying mother apple pie and Chevrolet. You know, I think you need to have defined steps and goals that if you're going to present something to the legislature, you can't just say everything's climate change, climate change, climate change. You have to have direct impacts. You have to direct steps that you're going to take to address the impacts that are occurring to the lake, and then goals that hopefully you're going to achieve. Without that, it just becomes a lot of, word speak, and that just gets us nowhere. Thanks
For that comment. Andrew, you still have your hand up? Thanks.
Yes, yeah, I'd like to build off what Senator Brock and Michael both said, and I relative to climate change. I mean, I would find it really helpful at one of our upcoming meetings, hopefully pretty soon, to have Jane Latorsek or whoever the best person is from the climate office meet with us and brief us because they're thinking about those very same questions. How do they measure carbon mitigation? How do they really think about and measure climate resilience? And it would be really helpful to talk that through with them and see how we can build on and support what's in the climate action plan, but also really maybe direct or redirect some of that to be more useful and meaningful for the things that we care about for the Lake Champlain Basin. So I think it's such a big, overwhelming plan to try to get your head around. There's so many things in it that it's hard to provide direction without that clear understanding. So I think that would be, at least to me, that would be really helpful. And maybe at one of our next meetings. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. One of the things that we've done, and Katie, remind me of the year of that, because I feel like I just started back on. I can't remember, maybe it was when I was transitioning into this role as chair, but we did have Secretary Moore and Nathalie, who's her counterpart in Quebec, come and talk about their the TMDL and the work that's been done and the investments that have been made, as well as I think some measurements. I can't remember the presentation 100%, but there were some measurements in terms of reduction or total phosphorus load reductions based on the practices that have been implemented. I just think what you just said, Senator Brock, about measurement and accountability my question is who's accountable to who? And to me, the government is accountable to us, the people, the citizens that are advising. And so in our action plan, or, you know, like the transparency of that information, or the availability of that information to people in the watershed. I think, and I believe, and don't quote me, but that was the first time that Quebec and Vermont had come together to present their TMDL results since the program started.
Yeah, so that was last year at a public meeting, and Sarah can remind me what the report is called, but the Vermont data is put together annually and is accessible in a report. But that was, yeah, the first time in my 3-ish years here that a presentation like that had happened publicly. And I think I spoke with Pierre, who's the chair of the Quebec CAC last month, because there was talk of that being an annual presentation. So I just wanted to follow up with him on what it didn't happen this summer. What would you like to do about that? But OBVBM, the Missisquoi Bay Watershed Organization, has a new watershed action plan. So they'd like to start implementing some of those measures and then do another version of that presentation next year.
So like next summer, like a year from now kind of thing? Yeah, okay. So that could go into our action plan too, maybe, or I don't know if that's appropriate for the action plan, but that's just something I'm thinking about in terms of measurement and accountability, right? And the basin program report just came out, the state of the lake, which has to happen every 3 years. That is another way that we're looking at dashboards of information of how the lake is improving or not improving, how different things are working. It's broken down really well, but that's something the basin program does, and that data comes from all different sources. Bob?
Oh, I'm sorry, my Bluetooth just disconnected for a second. Well, just once again, not to be a broken record, make it real quick, that in the end, like any TMDL, say like the phosphorus one, completely, doesn't meet any sort of metrics. Obviously, it's going to fall onto all permit holders, which would be generally me, who's generally putting drinking water back in the river. So that's it. Thank you.
So Bob, is your hand still up or is it down?
Oh, it's down. Sorry.
Thanks for that comment. And there is a link to the Vermont Clean Water report in the chat now. Okay, I don't want to get too lost in measurement and accountability. I do think that could be something that's in the action plan, and could be a direct ask of our government to provide biannual, whatever it is that we would like accountability on, whether it's number of floodplains restored or the TMDL or whatever it is. I think that's something that we should definitely ask for.
Yeah, just to make it clear, I wasn't trying to greatly modify what we have so far.
Okay. And I'm going to ask another question because I want you to look at the ones below, like what's missing from our list this year, and are we comfortable not having them on there if we wanted to have a more focused action plan this year? Wayne?
Yeah, Denise, I don't want to go backwards, but just to touch on the metric thing, the one, totally agree with certain categories. That's something that we all should strive for. The one I struggle with is the flood mitigation, floodplain resiliency. I've had the opportunity to learn about the FEMA program and how some of that makes sense and some doesn't make any sense at all. And basically what we're working to on some of these things, we have, they will fund to bring something up to current codes and standards. The challenge with that from a measurement metric thing is the bar seems to be changing, with climate change and the weather patterns. So, you have what we think we know today, and that doesn't mean, 2 years from now or 6 months from now or 5 years, we can have an event that far exceeds that. So that's a challenge. I also wanted to I'm getting a bunch of background. Cyanobacteria, see what other thoughts. I know Lori's a lot more versed on that than I am, and I wonder, from a research kind of thing, I feel like we observe it, monitor, we know when it occurs, where it occurs, how frequently it occurs. We kind of know that it gets worse in a very humid, warm weather temperature situation, maybe where it's shallow, very low winds. We kind of know all those kind of things, but I don't know that we really have answers into how we solve that or what the solution is to reduce the frequency of current. Is that a research project? I mean, and again, Lori's probably definitely more the speed than I am, but I feel like that's an area that we still really don't understand, what the solutions are, how we better address that moving forward.
I feel like oh, go ahead.
I can just jump in with some context there on the cyanobacteria side. The solution to cyanobacteria blooms is the same as the solution to many of the challenges facing our lake, which is reducing nutrient inputs and, dealing with nutrients that we already have in the lake in the water column and as legacy phosphorus. So it's multifaceted, but any project that is reducing nutrient inputs to Lake Champlain would have an impact on cyanobacteria as well. All right, back to you, Denise.
I was going to say the exact same thing, but you said it better. So thank you. Yeah, I do feel like, though, Kate, there was some research questions around cyanobacteria in last year's.
That's correct. That's specifically relating to the prevalence of benthic blooms. So that's a specific type of cyanobacteria bloom we're starting to see in the Lake Champlain Basin, and ways that the monitoring protocols that we already have in place could be expanded to better account for that different type of bloom and learning more about if those blooms are toxic or not. So that is a research project that will be starting up probably this time next year. We just had the award notices for those research projects go out recently.
Thank you. So can I go back to, okay, so I have two more hands up, but I do want to make sure that we circle back around to my other question about like more focus, less focus. What are we missing from the context from last year's, or the content from last year's that we are not seeing in this year's draft list of priorities that came out of our retreat, Michael?
Yep, I just want to comment under the 2024 priorities for, increase and improve equitable public accesses with priority for non-motorized recreation. I know as a sportsman, a hunter, an angler, we're seeing increased pressure on our fish and game accesses by non-motorized, the kayakers, canoers, etc., which are, really overwhelming. I know living in Waterbury, any day now you go to Waterbury Reservoir, it's an incredible backup to try to get on the reservoir. And I hate to say I canoe and kayak, but I think the canoers and kayakers are some of the, most discourteous people. I'm not saying there aren't motorboaters who are not, but the problem becomes, people who want to get out to hunt or fish, need to get out. And when there's a lot of, canoers and kayakers, it really creates back jams at accesses. And, technically any fish and wildlife access, a hunter or angler has a priority. But you tell that to a kayaker who's just going out paddling, they'll tell you where to go. And so I do think, as much as I don't disagree that there's a need for increased non-motorized recreation. But I think the motorized recreation is getting somewhat of a short shrift because of the non-motorized recreation overwhelming those accesses. Just a comment.
I'll just say, I think that's part of why that language is the way it is, just because there is conflict at those accesses that, they're intended for motorboats and they're not a lot of specific accesses for canoes and kayaks. And so, sort of creating more opportunities to disperse the access and use points. So it's, maybe not coming across that way. And that's something that the committee might be able to wordsmith a little bit better or include in their talking points. But if I recall correctly, that's part of the reasoning behind this point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Exactly. Brett. Wait, somebody else's hand was up before yours. Can't see all of you first. Somebody else. Okay, go ahead, Breck. I'm not sure if somebody else wanted to speak or not.
It occurs to me looking at this list that there might be a missing bullet point that is a complement to the third one, which is very much focused on farmers. And that would be a bullet point about woodland owners and managers. Our forest lands are the smallest per acre, adding phosphorus to the lake, but it's the largest land base we have. And so in some places, things like roads through our forest land and culverts and so forth deliver a lot of phosphorus that gets into the lake. And so a bullet point that was focused on, support and resources for woodland owners to facilitate sustainable management of forest lands and ensure consistent regulatory enforcement would be, I think, maybe an additional bullet point worth considering.
Have we had somebody speak in the last year? I thought we had wanted to, and then I don't know that we ever got around to it, having somebody come from the forest department. And isn't there a land use program in the state of Vermont that provides funding for foresters? I'm talking out of my skill set here, but I thought there was a land use program that provides funding to woodland owners who have diverse species or who want to keep their land in wood. Eric Clifford, do you know what I'm talking about?
The Culverts program does that.
The Culverts program?
Yep.
There's current use and there's
current use. That's the one, Brock. Thank you.
Current use
program is the
program
more common.
The culvert program for woodlands?
Yep.
In Vermont, there's the Better Back Roads program.
Oh, yes. Yep, that's what it's called. Okay.
And also Forest Legacy.
Forest Legacy, and that's more than current use? Is that a different program than current use?
Yep, okay. That's especially for some people who want different, there are some programs, where people would want to conserve their land, but they don't want to go as far as some of the restrictions for the where the Vermont Land Trust does. And Forest Legacy, I know we did that. Years ago, I used to be chair of our conservation commission, and we educated on a lot of landowners on the option for Forest Legacy over the land trust, which they were against.
Thank you. I feel like that could be something that we learn more about. And I agree. It is interesting. So we don't have anything. So I'm going back to what we did last year, which has been kind of our action plan for the last few years now. to what we're sort of looking at for new action plan or language. There isn't farming, forestry. The other one that we're missing is AIS. And again, this is draft and just thoughts at this point, but I want to make sure that once we do start putting like words on paper and drafting something, that everybody feels very comfortable about like what we're identifying as our focused priorities. Because I did hear that in June as well, that people were saying, you know, what worked well, what didn't work well is like we had too many priorities and not enough focus or direct asks of the legislator. So that I just want to make sure that we're meeting kind of the goals of this CAC.
Denise, a comment on that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I'm just wondering about in crafting the document for this coming year to start with kind of an upside down triangle, if you will. So the base, the bigger, broader piece here is climate variability, climate change, whatever you want to call it. That's not going to be too controversial to people. And then to have a list of priorities like this that may be longer than we can fund in a single year, just to keep people reminded that here are challenges that we need to look for. And then at the base of this document, the pointy end of this document, to your point, here are the suggested things that we feel are critical to invest in the next year. Is that a
I've got the graphic in my mind right now. I've already color coded it and everything, Breck. I like that. I
worry that if you don't just keep reminding people, you know, that there are these challenges, that if they're not mentioned, it's not that they're solved, you know.
Right.
It's that those are still back there, but we recognize that funds are limited, resources are limited, and so here are the things in the coming year that we think are the most important things. Now, I don't know what, I don't have a suggestion for what those are at the moment, but, well, I guess I do. I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we do, right? Aren't they the kind of things at the top of this list, like housing? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, okay, yes.
Eric?
I just look at the agricultural and the support resources for farmers, and without some defined actions, money going to certain places, I don't know. I mean, it's great to say support, but it needs to be a lot more specific in order to have any real merit. And again, I've said this before, the transition to sustainability, basically what we're seeing, a number of dairy farms in particular decreasing. That's basically because the smaller farms can't meet those regulatory, can't keep up with the practices that are necessary in part of the program. So it's I don't know. I'm not sure how useful that really is.
Denise, I muted you, sorry.
Yeah, no, I unmuted myself and then I muted myself. It's having kind of an unintended impact sometimes, right? Because they can't afford to keep up with it. And so then their solution is to sell their land and their farms to larger farmers who can do the work.
Yeah, I mean,
Eric, what do you think of the word regenerative agriculture? Is that better than sustainable?
No. I mean, the issue is, it's you're making a product, and it's very expensive to make that product, and unless you do it in some kind of scale that makes economic sense, it's just not going to work. And I'm one of those farms. I'm in a medium MFO, and the reality is there's practices that I need to be doing, that I should be doing, that I just can't afford. And the smaller the farmers are, unless there's no debt load, the harder it is for them to meet those regulations. And I mean, it didn't have to go back too many years to see 2,000 dairy farms. It's under 600 now, or something, that vicinity, 598 or something like that. And I don't know. I see this, and I'm not sure that I'm not saying it's not relevant, but you need to have some specifics on it so that it will really truly make a difference.
Thank you.
It's not fun, but that's
yeah. I mean, in the actual documents, there's a few more, we did wordsmith a paragraph around that. So there is some more information about what we mean by that, but
I will say, to Eric's point, that that's consistent with the questions that came up in the Senate Ag presentation, and that, what specific full funding of programs, what programs, and we don't know. So I think that that's a fair critique of the plan as written. I'm thinking about the folks who aren't in the room right now, and I think it would be a big move to fully remove ag from the action plan at this moment. But I think across all sections, trying to be more specific makes sense.
Yeah, and I remember those conversations in Senate Ag. I think one of the misses that we had last year was that we never met with Secretary Tebbetts. And so that was an unfortunate thing, that he wasn't able to weigh in on the plan before, or give us recommendations before we went to the legislator with it. But I think that your points are valid, and I would not suggest removing it completely, but definitely, like, it's not on the list that came out of our retreat. So I just want to point that out. I've had so many hands up, and I don't know. I'm just going to let you all unmute yourselves, and because I can't see all of you, and I don't know when hands are going up. So go ahead, Wayne.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. On the contaminants, just to focus for this next year, I would just leave pesticides and chlorides. I would drop the PFAS. The legislature banned the use of it this last session. That issue is so complicated. There isn't a whole lot of direction. That will come back up very quickly, probably in following years. But if we're really trying to focus, I just don't know what the ask is there. We know that's an issue with treated wastewater effluent that's going into the receiving waters. It's in biosolids, it's in drinking water supplies, but I'm not sure what our ask is there specifically for Lake Champlain at the moment. So maybe we just leave the pesticides and chlorides, and obviously we know the chlorides becoming more of an issue concern. It's got everybody's attention. So just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Anybody else on the ag piece?
Yeah, this is Bob Fisher. I have to echo what Wayne said. Thank you.
So we're probably about 45 minutes or so into our conversation, maybe less, but Kate said I don't oh wait, there's a comment. It was not completely banned. It was just what? Just certain compounds in certain products. Okay, thank you. I've not read that legislation, so I'm not 100% sure either. Okay, so let's see. Our next steps here. I just want to kind of map this out. As we're gathering more data from all of you, I think, Katie, I'm looking at you, even though you might not know that. We should put something together with language behind it, with some of the feedback we got tonight. If anybody wants to help with that, I think we should probably create a small committee to work on this over the next few weeks, and then decide if we want to have an August meeting or if we just want to try to work on this and then come, like, kind of do draft emails and people respond. We've had pretty good success with the Google Doc when I yell at people, and Katie sends it out a few times to get feedback and discussion going, edits, comments, however we want to do it. So I think that's kind of our next step on this. I would say if people feel very strongly that something needs to be in there that is not, that we need to have, you need to make the case for why we would include it or why it should be included. What do people think about kind of those next steps? So let's not do an August meeting. I think that's a little torturous. But we could meet back in September as long as people are willing to start looking at some language documents and make edits over the next few weeks after Katie and myself and anybody else who wants to pull some draft language together for the action plan this year.
Denise, could I ask a question of clarification as a newer member of the committee here about so there's a balance in this document between kind of a higher level aspirational delivery to the legislature and being more specific about here are the specific things that we think you should do. And I'm kind of interested in the comment that Katie made a couple of moments ago, that when in the Ag Committee they saw this bullet point which on agriculture, which I think most of these bullet points read fairly aspirationally, and that they ask, okay, well, what specifically do you want us to do? So I guess
that's the challenge. That's our challenge.
So, but is the challenge, do we have the capacity to actually get those specific bullet points? If we were to do that, if that's what we were trying to do, for each one of these bullet points, I would be stating that bullet point, and then I'd be looking for the agency head, whoever, who was in charge of that, to say, what is it that's on your desk at the moment? And I'm thinking about what Senator Brock told us a couple of meetings ago about how we needed to be there at the gate with these specific bill ideas and so forth. If that's our objective, then it would be good. It would be essential, I think, for us to be having meetings for each one of these bullet points with the key agency person and saying, okay, what is on your table? And then we can think about which of those things that they're talking about we think are most important and put those out there. I don't know that we've got time to do that. And so is this a matter of educating the legislature about what this document actually is, that it's intended to be kind of a litmus test for them to say, if they've got something that's coming over the transom, that is saying, or they got 2 or 3 things that they could invest in, But if they hold them up and put them against these aspirational bullet points, that item B in this list is actually going to address that better than A or C is going to, that's what we're encouraging them to invest in. And so it kind of educating the legislature not only about what's important in this list, but how to use the list. Sorry, that may have been way too vague.
Sorry, Denise, you're muted.
No, I saw you muted me. I have a fan on, so that's probably where the background noise is coming from because my house is so hot. I think that you're spot on with everything that you just said, Breck. I think that is the challenge of this committee and this action plan, right? We want to ask for specifics, but you're right. We don't have the time or the resources to go and find people to like speak to very specific things that we put in here. It is an aspirational wish list of like, or I mean, aspirational wish, probably not wish list. We believe this is in my mind, this action plan is what we believe is the best thing for the Lake Champlain, right? Like that is what we believe from our like core values, our ideas, the information that we gather from our communities, the people we know, the backgrounds that we have, all of that. This is like our core belief is that this action plan is what's going to make our Lake Champlain healthier and better for now and for future generations, right? And we want to get this into legislators' hands before they get into the session, so they have this kind of as background, so that it's not just kind of part of the noise of the session. I think is sort of the other piece of it. But I do think when we do get more specific and say we need, this amount of money or these programs aren't funding enough of this, it gets us in a little bit of hot water because we don't necessarily have all the answers when we go to the legislature, because we are not a staffed. We're staffed by Katie to run our meetings, but we don't have time to get lobbyists and meet with all the agency heads and do all of that work. So I think what you just said is spot on, and I think we as an organization or as a committee need to decide who are we when we show up at the State House. Like what makes the most sense for us as a committee when we show up there? What information do we want to be giving to the legislators?
This is Randy. I think we want to give expertise and advice and experience. I think when we come, the whole idea of getting our legislative program lined up well before the legislative session is to use that time to look for allies, people who are interested in the various issues that we're talking about, who can introduce bills. And whether they be individual bills or one omnibus bill, there are different ways to go about doing that. But to get as many allies in the legislature and then seeing whether or not those allies' plans match what we have in terms of our priorities and issues, and whether or not we can construct pieces of legislation that satisfy both. And that's what we do between September and December. And then ideally, when you go into the session, we've identified people who are passionate about particular bills that will help what we want to do, and are in positions in committees to introduce those bills where they will be likely to succeed. And these are things that those of us who are on the committee can perhaps help just identifying, who is going to be helpful and who might not be.
Wayne, were you going to say something?
Yeah, Denise, I just wanted to go back to the cyanobacteria, and that kind of dovetails with some of the recent comments. Is you know, it's critically important. You know, somebody goes to the beach, they can't swim, the beaches are closed. It's probably one of the things on the list that probably affects a significant large number of people. But again, I don't know what the ask is. You know, it's something that needs to be addressed. We need to solve, we need to, you know, we have the legacy phosphorus. You know, we're doing a good job of removing phosphorus. We're not necessarily addressing other nutrients or required to remove other nutrients, but so just to kind of go back to that one, it's important. Again, back to kind of the more recent comments with others, I don't know what the ask is there, I guess, from, you know, what our priorities are here.
Thank you.
And Denise, also just to add to very quickly, kind of thinking about earlier, the discussion about the research, love to make sure we don't forget, you know, we had the presentation about some of the things happening in New York, and maybe that's a good research project for Vermont, is to pick a community or a couple communities and, you know, help education PR with salt use and those kind of things. Be great to get something started over here so we could start making some positive impacts on salt reduction and look at alternatives and other ways to better reduce the chloride levels going into the receiving waters.
Thanks for that. I'm curious if anybody wants to respond to Senator Brock's comment. Breck, do you feel the same as?
I was just writing a comment that to put in here. I agree completely with what Senator Brock is saying about developing those contacts or developing those advocates for us. But we have to give them something to advocate for, you know? And so what is the specific thing that we give to them? And as we're having this conversation, and this is now kind of a longer term vision for what the CAC is and does, but I'll just put it out there. I'm just wondering whether the agency heads are really the contacts that we need to be developing here, and that rather each one of the agencies has a policy director. They're the ones who are actually sitting there and gathering the ideas about what is the next bill that we need to be putting out there. And I don't know whether it's too much for this group to do, but if we could develop a relationship with that person, not necessarily invite that person to come to one of our meetings and get grilled by all of us together, but if Eric was to go and meet with the policy director for ag, you know, and say, hey, what is it that's on your table that is going to likely affect Lake Champlain, and bring those ideas back to us so that as a group we could say, okay, we think that this one is a really big one that ought to be pressed. And now to Senator Brock's point, we can take that bill that we got from the policy director at ag and say, hey, let's look for the advocates that we might have in you know, in the legislature to help us with that. So you know, it's probably too late to start this now, but you know, we could each volunteer to go meet with somebody and then bring what we learned back to the meeting and talk to them about that. Talk to the group about that.
I don't think it's at all too late to do this, and this doesn't have to be a major, vast project by any means. I think we need to identify within the group those people who have relationships with the policy heads in the various agencies that we're concerned about. I think that this is a great way to use those of us in the legislature to reach out and have conversations with people in A&R and in ag to talk about the future of next year. And what are you thinking about? What kind of legislation are you looking for? How can we help you? And I'm certainly willing to do that. I suspect most of the other legislators who are on the commission are willing to do that. And the time to do that is now, before that stuff is been developed. That's a few phone calls, maybe a meeting or two.
Yep. Eric, thank you. I appreciate all of these comments. This is great. Eric?
I agree with Senator Brock completely. And as our farmer group, the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition, that's what we're doing. We're meeting with them 4 times a year. And that is the way to do it. I really think that if, as a committee, if we were to develop a strategy like that, I think we could really give them some concrete proposals that could really be meaningful.
I do want to offer this. And Kate, I might be wrong, but I feel like this year we actually did name bills when we went in with our comments, which I think was a really important thing to do. I don't know that we'd ever really done that before, where we actually said, here are some bills that we think you should support, or that we were aware of and are watching as well. So I think I'm just trying to figure out how to, like, and I know it's a few phone calls, but like, who are we calling? Who's calling them? Who want, is it, and are we assigning people this for the next couple of weeks and then coming back in September and talking about it as we're sort of drafting our action plan? And then when we get back to in September, we can say, here are the things that we need added to the action plan based on those conversations. I think that's where I'm sort of like getting stuck in this like moment. Carol, I saw your hand go up and go back down.
No, I agree with Senator Brock, and but I think your question's a really good one. I wonder what the reaction to that question is.
Can I raise just a suggested approach? And that may be those who are here who have either relationships, professional or otherwise, with key people in the agencies that would be helpful to us in formulating policy. And people that you would be willing to call up and talk to just in an exploratory way. Send the names of those people and your name to Katie, and have Katie be the screener who basically sorts these out so that we aren't all calling the same person on the same issue. And it's not that it's going to be a big list and then get back to us within a week or so, and then we divide it up and then go do it.
Sorry, I'm speaking. That makes a lot of sense. Ricky, I see your hand up, and it sounds like you guys have done some of this already. So I'd love to hear more.
What I was going to add, I'm always a person, and I've been managing for years, warehouses, whatever. And when you talk to those people that Senator Brock said, ask them what is important to do with the lake to improve it. Always get their opinion, and it'll help you find the area that they're interested in and build on that. I'm sorry to talk.
Don't apologize. I think that's great.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other comments on this direction in terms of like getting more thoughts from people in the government, policymakers, in terms of what they're thinking about and how we might go about accessing that knowledge and information?
I think the other thing that the committee has talked about in the past is trying to look for opportunities to get agency input on the action plan, but not letting the agency input like totally drive the action plan, and making sure that it's still a document representative of the community voices that you all represent.
I totally agree with that, Katie. That's the thing, we want to align, but not necessarily let them, right. We're still an independent body that is making proposals or creating this action plan based on the community that we serve from, and the information and the knowledge and the history and all of that we have. I mean, I think this is flipping us a little bit a different way. Last year, what we did is we drafted the action plan and then went to Secretary Moore. And I think she was the only one we did end up meeting with prior to the legislative session or to the actual release of the action plan. And so I think phone conversations are easy enough to have in the next couple of weeks. I don't know, like meeting in person with a few of us going. So I think they might have to just be individual calls, and then maybe we come back together in a couple of weeks and or email Katie like what you learned from those from that research.
Can I just raise one other issue? I think all of this is great. I think the other thing, though, that we need to think about is it's not just the agency heads and officials that we need to get input from. If there is potential input from, whether it be some of the nonprofits or others who have issues, the issue-based organizations. Now, they all have agendas, and we know that, but seeing what those agendas are, and particularly what legislation they may be thinking of putting on the table. For those of you in contacts with people like that, it'd be useful just to raise a call as to what are you thinking of in the legislature next session that perhaps we should think about that we could consider as well. And again, that's the same information in briefest form to relay to Katie so that we have a bunch of information to start from before we move forward. Just a thought.
That's pretty well aligned with some conversations that Denise and Karina and I have had about trying to, align with other watershed groups and organizations throughout the basin. I had an initial conversation with the Vermont Federation of Lakes and Ponds and got their feedback on our last action plan. And they brought up some good concerns about how we were using the word chemicals and how that can be pretty polarizing for folks. I think I just wanted to raise that to say that this is something that we've sort of started already, and it's good to know that you're on board to support that. I think, folks have specific organizations you think we should be connecting with. I'm happy to do a lot of this outreach, that's within my job description here and supporting you all. And I know it's summer and this is a volunteer committee, so I don't intend to put, a part-time job on your plate. So yeah, just keep me posted on how you'd like me to help in this process, and I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, I definitely think Representative Odie and Senator Brock, if you have people you think that we should be connecting with, or if you want to connect with some of your colleagues, I think that would make a lot of sense as well. I'm happy to reach out to some of my friends in the House as well, and just ask those questions. I know I don't know who the policy directors are, so that might be something that we just have to kind of look into, Katie. But I think we can figure out who they are and what they're thinking about. I always just imagine just going to the secretaries because I felt like the easiest place to go, or the not easiest, but the most relevant. But I think you're right. I don't know why it would need to have to be the secretary. I think the policy directors are just as influential and know what they're drafting. We're not quite at time yet. I do want to make sure that everybody's had a chance to think about the action plan, because I think our next step is to really draft some draft language around how we want to position this action plan this year, which might look very different than our past few action plans. And it will be continued to be informed over the next month or so with some of these conversations that will be upcoming. But if there's anything that comes out, and then I think, Katie, we can just put everything in a Google Doc and share that link out again once we start putting stuff in the document.
Yep.
And then I think getting to Katie people that you think we should be reaching out to, or if you're going to reach out to them so that we can kind of create that list. I think that's a good next step as well. And so if we review our upcoming meeting, we will not meet in August. Am I hearing that that's a yes from everybody? Are we feeling comfortable not meeting in August? Thank you for pulling that up. What's the CHP update?
That was the presentation we're supposed to have on May 15th that I am still working to reschedule. The Champlain Hudson Power
Oh,
Express work that's
thank
been
you.
underway. So the New York CAC is still interested in an update on that as well. So trying very hard to work with their schedule to find a time that'll work for a presentation. But I think that would just be a broad informational presentation that all 3 CACs would be invited to. It would not be like a mandatory regular, not that the meetings are mandatory, but it wouldn't be a regularly scheduled CAC meeting.
Okay. So I'm seeing the meet with secretaries to discuss preliminary AP priorities. So we might just move that up for our summer work. And then we would still continue to work towards finalizing our action plan in October. And then doing an outreach to legislators about the finalized plan between October and November. Legislative educational event co-sponsored by VTCAC. That's what we voted on the other day or at our retreat. We don't have a date on that yet. And then the action plan rollout. Oh, you have a TBD on that, 11/14, 5 to 7. Would that be our November meeting?
Yeah, and that date might be different, but there are a couple of different conflicts with the Mondays. So our normally scheduled meeting time is a holiday. And then I think the week before I'm not available, and I think the week after you weren't available that Monday. So we were thinking potentially that Thursday.
How's that schedule look to people? All right, I'll take your silence as a this is good, Denise and Katie. Nice work. So makes sense to me. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate the chat. Okay, so let's do this. We're going to be sending some emails and getting some information out there. If you have people that you are reaching out to, please send them to Katie. And the questions really are, what are you thinking about right now for the upcoming legislative session? Where can we support you? You know, this is who we are. This is what we do. And we're drafting our 2025 action plan right now. So we'd love your input and ideas. How does that sound? I'll take silence as affirmative again.
Sounds good.
Does that sound
Sounds
good? Thank you, Bob. Okay. All right. I think, is that the end of the agenda unless anybody has anything else? Any updates that are relevant to the CAC interest from anybody? One thing I will say, maybe the September meeting, I don't know if having somebody come from the climate action plan. I don't know who that would be, Andrew. It's late.
I think we had talked about Jane.
You're asking, yeah, that's who you have on there. I think that's where I would start.
Jane. Okay.
With Jane, yeah.
And Wayne put in the chat that it's Lake Appreciation Month. I had no idea. That's awesome. Any other updates?
Bye.
Bye, Eric.
Bye.
I think we better release everyone, Denise, before there's a mutiny.
Okay. Have a great night, you guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.